they matter, because to me, nature is very important. That's why I care about the bees, and we care a lot about the trees. Trees can really speak to us. They can encourage you to think. They inspire. We get poetry about them. They give. This is a story I read to my kids a million times when they were young, and not just in English. I actually read it in Hebrew to them once. I don't know what I was saying, but okay. So what's a tree? Let's define it. It's a tall plant. It has trunk. It has branches made of wood. In general, it should be at least 20 feet high at maturity. And it has a single trunk and then lots of big secondary branches. So compared with other plants, trees are in general long-lived, which is nice. So there are two broad categories. One are the deciduous trees. This is also called the hardwood trees, but they have broad, flat leaves, and they drop the leaves seasonally. And then we have the coniferous, or the conifers, which have small needle-like leaves, and they keep them year-round. That said, there are many exceptions to the rule. There are deciduous trees that will hold their leaves. Depends on where they're located. And there are conifers that will drop. So it depends on where you are. So it's the deciduous that produce what we call the hardwood. And they have leaves that drop usually. The trunk in a deciduous divides. Sometimes you can't quite see it, but usually you can.
Never recorded anything.
They have very large branches and broad leaves, and their seeds are nuts or berries. They are slow growing. The conifers are, and I've got my favorite trees here, the redwoods, which we'll talk about. I've been all over there too. These are considered softwood and evergreens. That's how I always knew them. The trunks are straight. This is the coastal redwood, you can see. They have needles for their leaves, and their seeds are in pine cones. Okay. So here's a coastal redwood, a giant sequoia, and then we get all the way down here to this little white spruce, which is a little bigger than a house. And they are symmetrical. You can just see that when you look for both sides. And these grow quickly. So to identify what a tree is, I can show you, but I will tell you that the easiest way is to put an app on your telephone, which is what I have, because I don't know. But you look at the bark, the fruit, the leaves, you look at the twig, you look at what's called the crown, what the leaves are. These are different crown shapes. Leaves are very interesting, and you can take a picture of the leaf with your smartphone and go into a program, and it'll help you to identify what the tree is. So you look at the veins, you look at the overall shape, how they're arranged. You have simple versus compound. The edges and how they're arranged on the stem. But let's move further down and get to the roots of trees. There are many, much more than you realize. They are anchors to what's right above it. They anchor parts above the ground. And this is where food and water is transported through the roots. And different trees have different root structures. These are very shallow, some are very deep. These are those aerial roots, and these are the mangroves, the silk root. Excuse me. So let's look at a root up close. Very interesting. You have the root cap, very bottom, and you have what they call vascular tissue, and that's living tissue. And part of that up the middle is xylem, that's yellowish stuff. And that's what brings things up from the soil, up to the stems. And the phloem, which is the pink reddish stuff here, brings food from the leaves, excuse me, all the way down to the roots. Okay, kind of like a network of straws. You see all these little holes. And then you have the root hairs, which are what absorbs and anchors. All right, I'm going to show you some up close pictures. These are at SEMS, scanning electron microscope pictures. Hang on. So we look at a root, and I don't know what magnification any of these are. I didn't pay attention to that. Root cap, which would cover, then all of this are the vascular structures that rise up. And then on a cross section on the top, you can see the phloem is the greenish and the xylem they're showing is the blue. But there's another thing here called the cambium, which runs in between them. And we'll talk about that in a minute. This is the phloem, this is the xylem. Here they're showing you the magnification. This, I think, is fabulous. This is the xylem. I did a whole talk on microscopy and had most incredible pictures. But this one blew me away when I saw that. Now the cambium layer is where the growth tissue is in the stems and the roots of many plants. And these are embryonic cells. They're like stems, our stem cells, you know, they're ready to be anything. So if this is the cambium, it will first produce the xylem, which they're showing red here, to one side, and then it will do the phloem cells to the other side to give us the vascular tissue. And if you look at it schematically, the cambium is kind of running like a circle, and then you have the xylem and you have the phloem running all the way up the roots and into the stems. Now this part is mostly responsible for the growing of trees in thickness. Okay, trees get fatter and fatter and fatter. Many of you who have been to the sequoias certainly know that. So let's look at the trunk. The trunk has many layers, and it's the things we talked about. So the outer bark, which is dead, right? Then the inner bark is the phloem. Here's the cambium. It's microscopic. These are where the cells are. And this is xylem. And in younger trees, it's called sapwood and carries the food up. Okay, no, the xylem is up. This is
Okay.
this is the bark. Be quiet. Okay, so trees have rings that are yearly put down, and they also have these rays. Rays kind of weaken the trees. Some think it happens as the tree's water system gets lower as the trees get older. The outside is the bark, and like I said, barks are not alive. They are very protective. They're dead cells. And this is where you will get the split as the diameter of the trunk grows. And here's a few. Here's the redwood, poplar, sequoia, here's elm, and here's a dogwood. They're all different. There are stories that you can get out of looking at a trunk and cutting it. It gets the patterns from the growth season. When it's growing, and that's usually in the spring, you're mostly getting the light colored xylem cells. But at the end of it, everything becomes darker and the walls thicken. So every season's ring has a light and a dark. Not every tree that you can see it in, but in general. And you count the rings. So This is 1489 when the tree is planted. Here's Columbus. Here's Pilgrims coming, Declaration of Independence, start of the Civil War. Tree survives 2 world wars, man lands on the moon, and the birth year of the idiot who cut down the tree is 1971. So it's very interesting to read them. Little bit about how trees grow. I'm sorry, I'm dry.
No, want me to turn them up?
We've been running our heat now, and it's very dry. So as trees grow, the leaves need sunlight, and that's how you get photosynthesis. Because if a tree doesn't get taller, it'll get shaded by other trees, and they can't survive. You can't get the sunlight. At the very tip, you will see what terminal bud. It's also called an apial mesosterm, and there's some lateral buds, and then there's a scar. And that means this is 1 year's growth. You can figure out the growth by looking for these signs, even if the tree doesn't have leaves at the time. Okay, and then this is last year's growth. The crown is what gets taller when the tree grows in height. So it can grow in 2 directions, obviously. It can grow upward. It elongates where the buds are, where the buds appear. And it can grow wider, and that's the cambium growing, increasing the diameter. And the root grows, root hairs grow also. Okay, so you had those terminal buds we talked about. You have the circumference. But once a tree reaches a certain height, it does stop getting taller. That's because there's a limit to how much it can pull up from its roots to get all the way up to the top with the water and the nutrients that it needs. But they will continue to get wider. And the expression I love is old trees are like active, healthy bodybuilders. This is the General Sherman giant sequoia. It's over 2,000 years old, and it's one of the larger trees in the world. It's an incredibly beautiful tree. So let's talk about what makes a tree alive. So we have a process of what we call transpiration, which is the evaporation from the leaves. When the leaves have that evaporation, it creates an upward pull, and it helps bring things all the way up from the roots down at the base. And what happens is, oh, it's gonna drive me crazy. The plant loses water, and it exits. The evaporation goes to the stomata. This is a blown up picture of the stomata. And these are microscopic. They're not big, and they're on the underside of the leaves. If for some reason there's not enough water in the soil, these will close so that the tree doesn't lose any more water. So the leaves, the living leaves, fascinating. This is where photosynthesis takes place. Oh, it's driving me crazy. I have to change this. I don't want the grid. All right. It occurs in the chloroplasts. These are those little funny green corner things. And in it is the chlorophyll, the green pigment, which is why leaves are green. And it's the chlorophyll that, can I close this? No. It's the chlorophyll that absorbs energy, the sunlight. It has to have the energy. It takes in, and we're going to talk about this a lot, carbon dioxide and water. It releases oxygen and carbohydrates, mostly in sugar forms, during the process of photosynthesis. And all of that's going through the under part of the leaf in the stomata. And if any of you interested, here is a chemical reaction. It takes 6 carbon dioxide, 6 water, solar energy to get C6H12O6, which is carbohydrate, and 6 oxygen. Now, trees are social. If you had told me this about 5 years ago, I would have said, huh? What are you talking about? Okay, but they really are. And this is the interesting thing that I want you to hear about today. Trees talk, and I put that in quotes, through what's called the WWW, which is the Wood Wide Web. When you think about how we used to view trees, and many people still do, they see trees as loners in total competition for water, nutrients, sunlight, and the winners shade out the losers. So it's like it's an atom, and they live in isolation. And the timber industry, so forests, is simply wood producing systems. That's it. But in the past very short period of time, we've had scientific evidence that refutes this. And it's what blew me away the first time I gave this talk, which was 4 years ago. It shows that trees, especially the same species, are communal. And that sometimes they will even form an alliance with other species. And they are communicating with one another, however you want to define communicating. They work together because in order for trees to grow, they need a web of relationships. It's very important. So a wise old mother tree will feed their saplings with sugar. Okay, here's mama, here's the baby saying, I'm hungry, and the mother will feed it. It also can warn neighbors when danger approaches. So there is this cooperative relationship through communication. And the real action, as I'm going to show you, is taking place underground, just below our feet. There's a number of ways that trees communicate. It can be chemical, it can be hormonal. It's even been found that sometimes there are slow pulsing electric signals. But they also communicate with scents, like the pheromones, which we talked about with the bees. And here's a great example. This is an acacia tree. Acacia tree grows in very dry areas like Africa. We saw them in Israel. And the giraffes love the leaves. So they start to eat them. The tree notices its injury and it will emit a distress signal of ethylene gas. And the neighboring acacias will detect it. And they will pump tannin into their leaves. Tannin is a foul-tasting chemical for animals, and it can be poisonous in large amounts. We know that trees have some sensory systems. They can detect scents. They possibly have taste. This is a caterpillar that attacks frequently. This is, I think, a pine tree leaf. But they can detect that the caterpillar is there, not just by the feeling of it, but by the saliva of the bug. So it releases the pheromone, which attracts a parasitic wasp, lays its eggs inside, and the ending is not nice because the larvae eat the caterpillars from the inside out. We know that trees help each other. They send distress signals about drought, about disease, about insect attacks. This says, watch out, mate, aphids are about. Other trees will alter their behavior when they get these messages. So this is the underground network, and it's a network of fungi. They share water and they share nutrients through the networks, and they communicate. How do they do that? I asked that very question when I first read about this. First of all, you have to understand that the root systems of trees could be easily 2 to 4 times the size of the tree. So it's a lot. Underground, the roots are intertwined with other roots, so that trees of the same species, and sometimes different, can share resources. Trees create sugar. An example, of course, is the maple sugar, and that's their food. They send this food to trees that are in their network if they need help. And where do they do this? The secret is under our feet in the hidden world of tree roots. Sometimes they call these neighborhoods. Mr. Rogers would like that. But the roots will leak out sugars and other compounds into the soil to be sucked up by other roots. And they have actually shown, you can see that root tips join together with these microscopic fungal filaments to form the links of the network. And I'm going to show you that in a minute. It's called a mycorrhizal network. See these white strands? That's from the fungi. And with trees, it's usually the mycelia fungi, but it could be mushrooms. And that you see mushrooms growing near the base of trees. On the top, you see the mushroom part, but if you look under the ground, you can see this white network. And this network can penetrate roots of neighboring trees. They work together, but for a price. This is a fee for service. Fungi need to eat, so they get to consume 30% of the sugar from the tree that the trees have photosynthesized from the sunlight, and the sugar will fuel those. And in return, they scavenge the soil for nitrogen, phosphorus, all the other mineral nutrients that the tree needs. And that's what gets absorbed and consumed. So they work together. I don't know how long ago this happened in their evolution, but it's pretty amazing. When you have young saplings, baby trees, and it's in deeply shaded parts, this network is a lifeline because it can't get the sunlight it needs to photosynthesize and to grow. And they survive because the big trees around them pump sugar into the network to feed them so they can grow. Amazing. Another amazing thing about trees is many of them, not all types, observe social distancing. They grow away from friends and family members. I want you to see this. Now, I like to do some drawing and painting. These are called negative spaces. And I love when I see these kind of patterns. You can see no branches are touching. They are growing tips are sensing where the light is, so they're growing to the light, but it also senses when there's foliage on neighboring trees, and it will not grow in that direction. They don't touch their neighbors. Not true of all trees, but it's true of a lot of them. And they think maybe it's because it limits the insects jumping and transmission of diseases from tree to tree, maybe. A lot of the information about trees in the past few years is come from a gentleman called the Tree Whisperer. He lives in Germany. His name is Peter Wallenben, and he has written several books. He actually, can I move this down? No. Sees the forest as a super organism of unique individuals. Now, there are some people that think he's going a little too far with that, but and he is a scientist. No, he compares beaches, which I guess are what's in his backyard, to an elephant herd. They look after their own, he said, help their sick, and are reluctant to abandon their dead. Okay, it's a little extreme, but his work and the work of many others has raised some very hot issues that are current issues right now. We know that the plant has signs that they can sense things in their surroundings. We know they can react, we know they can adapt, but the question is, do they feel? And what does that mean? Okay. Big issue. Are they intelligent? Some people say yes, other people say impossible. They don't have a nervous system. You know? What does intelligent mean? Can they perceive things in their environment and adapt to them? Can they communicate? Yes, trees can. Do they have social interaction? Well, yeah, depending on how you define it. But do they cooperate for mutual health and safety? And in most cases, they do. The bigger controversy is, can trees learn? And can they store memory? How do you learn and store memory if you don't have a nervous system and a brain? Well, that raises the issue, is there a brain? And what I find fascinating is Charles Darwin, now this would have been in the 1850s, actually wrote about root brains. He believed the roots were the tree's brains and were hidden under the ground. Maybe he's right, we don't know. The problem that we have is we project our own feelings and self-awareness onto plants, and that can be a trap in deciding and defining what plants have. Plants have a type of awareness. I hope I showed you that. There's no evidence that they exhibit self-awareness. So why do trees exist? Well, everything in nature is about balance. Trees help us, very important. They hold the soil, they conserve the water. They absorb the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. They give us food and wood and medicine, and they keep the life in the earth. They buffer the sun, they buffer wind, they are sound barriers, among many things. So if we have a factory pouring out 3 tons of carbon dioxide, an acre of forest will absorb all of that. And in return, it releases oxygen. We have forgotten about that in many countries around. Trees support life. So are you breathing? Thank a tree. Okay, they make the oxygen, they eat our carbon dioxide, so be kind. Birds need trees badly. That's their food, their nest. Animals, there are some animals that never, ever come down from the trees. We saw that in Costa Rica with the sloths who live up in the trees. But some just use it for food, some use it to take a nap. But even dead trees have value. They make nests. And if you remember my talk on bees love to get inside dead trees for their hives. And of course, I want to know how they took this picture. I would love to know. I mean, Dave and I have had dogs. I couldn't get a dog to sit 2 seconds like this. So maybe it's Photoshopped. I don't know. So let's look at just a few beautiful trees. These are cherry trees. This is the dragon blood trees of Yemen. Why? Because their sap is red. These are highly endangered trees. Jacaranda, this one's I think in England. Gorgeous, as long as I don't have to rake them. Okay, these are our maples. And my husband could cringe thinking of all the years he was raking up leaves. And there are trees that are water lovers. So you have the cypress and the mangroves, which is beautiful. And then we get our redwoods. These are my pictures. I took them in 2016. And these are the coastal redwoods, but there's a couple of types of redwoods, coastal and the giant sequoia, okay? And there's very few left, as many of you who are on the West Coast know that. The redwood range is very small. The sequoias are clumped together in just one area, but they grow. The redwood can be 379 to 380 feet tall. Their age can be up to 2,000 years. They are big. The sequoias are a little smaller, but they can actually live longer. And they can have an incredible diameter of 40 feet or so. Every single layer of these trees has a special ecosystem. Things live uniquely in each space. So let's look at the species that we see in California. They're commonly called the coastal redwood for Sequoia sempervirens, or the giant sequoia for the Sequoia dendron giganteum. This is going to be on your final exam, so make sure you know how to spell it. You have a family of related trees collectively. So they can all be called redwoods, they can all be called sequoias, doesn't matter. As far as longevity, well, first of all, the sequoias need the Sierra snowpack to stay healthy and to get its water. And the coast redwoods rely on the fog. And you can see that fog coming in, as I'm sure many of you know. Very important that they rely on fire. They need fire to clear the brush and to create space for the seedlings to take root. Both of them have no diseases, virtually unknown. And insect damage is very insignificant because of the tannin, which is why we use them for outside furniture and build fences. And they have a shallow root system that can extend out to 50 feet or more. Okay, so they have a will to survive. If you knock over a redwood, it can continue growing by its limbs. You can have a group of them called a cathedral group. This is actually Cathedral Grove in Muir Woods. I'll tell you why we're there in a few minutes. But we've been there a few times, and these trees are all growing out of the living remains of a redwood that was knocked over. When they're exposed to fire, they char. They char into a heat shield. Okay, we know that the bark can be as thick as a foot in places. And that's me. I forgot to bring my ruler to measure, but that's me inside a bark. They can regenerate, and that helps in their survival as a species. You can get new sprouts from the stumps and the roots that come up as clones. These big burls are really just hard growths filled with dormant seedlings on a living tree, but they can sprout a new tree if the trunk is damaged. This is Hyperion, the world's tallest tree, 379.3 feet, and it's estimated to be 700 to 800 years old. National Geographic has a wonderful thing about these on YouTube, and it was also in their magazine. You had to unfold and unfold and unfold the page until you saw the whole tree. And they actually climbed up there with ropes and took measurements. Look at, well, I don't want to do, let me show you. I want you to see how it towers over the land, that tree. Okay, and then we have old trees. This is an oak tree that's 1,500 years old. This is mesquite that's 4,000 years old. This is a banyan, and it was born in 600 CE in China. This is a 3,000-year-old juniper, still alive in Utah. These are used in Wales. They're 1,000 years old, and it must be a great place for a wedding. This is the Great Basin bristlecone. It is 4,800-year-old. They call it the Methuselah, and it's in California. And in general, bristlecones tend to be the most longest lived trees if they survive. And then we have some pretty odd trees. This is the baobab. That's one tree. Fire-resistant bark, edible fruit. It can survive droughts. It's one of the longest living, strangest looking plants in the world. And the expression is, the tree shrugs and another decade passed. Bottle trees, these are in Australia. This is a very confused palm tree. This is a juniper. We've seen a few of these that have been subjected to bad weather and wind, but it's still alive. And this is a walking beech tree. Do you see why it's called that? I think it's incredible. Although I also think you can call it an elephant tree, but whatever. Okay, in Hawaii, this is in Hawaii. It's called the rainbow eucalyptus. And we saw it in Costa Rica. It's fascinating to see the colors on it. This is a pistachio tree in Israel. Did you know that trees can grow anywhere? This is a tree growing on a tree. This is an acacia tree, which is in it. This picture I took in Israel. It's in Timnah in the desert. This is a tree in France that I took. It was growing out of the concrete wall of a building, and it's alive. This is in growing out of redwood. So trees we know can grow on stumps, and nothing gets in a tree's way. This is a tower in Cambodia that has been taken over. Somehow this poor guy, as the tree was growing, this golf ball ended up inside it and stayed there until the tree was felled, and they had to open it and find the golf ball. This is Angkor Wat. It's a temple covered with a tree. So be careful not to leave cars and stuff outside too long, because the tree will take it over. The tree will grow around boulders, or if it can, it'll go straight through. It depends on the kind of rock it is. So I want you to try and imagine a world without trees. We know that forests are the lungs of the earth, and yet look what we're doing to it. The Amazon rainforest gives us half the world's oxygen supply, and it's disappearing. So can we live in a world without trees? This poor guy came up. We know that almost 50% of the Earth's original forest cover is gone. It has mostly been destroyed in the past 3 decades. All right. So in 2014, our planet lost more than 45 million acres. This used to be a nice, moist area of beautiful trees, but the trees are gone. There's nothing to hold the water. So it is dried out totally. Tropical country.
I have something to tell you.
Well, hang on, honey, we'll finish and then you can tell me anything, okay? We have tropical countries account for more than half of the loss that we have experienced. And largely because of agriculture, they want to make room for rubber, for soya, and particularly palm. Palm plantations are killing off our trees. And also for cattle, which are taking over with trees. We use them to build houses. Trees are being lost. This is, and that was the Sumatran rainforest. If you buy it, they will log it. This is the Amazon. You order a nice redwood tree or a nice piece of furniture, the wood has to come from someplace. And most of the wood that comes from here is illegal. Okay, this is in Borneo. This used to be the home to the Sumatran tiger and to the orangutans. And now it's a palm oil plantation. And if the animals try to come back in, they are shot. They're killed. This is the disaster we're facing. This was Brazil in 1900. This is Brazil now. Okay, very bad. This is our country. In 1620, the East Coast covered with virgin forests and a little bit in the West. And now, almost all gone. So we have a choice, this or this. It's a choice. Humans are the only creatures who create trees, cut them down, and then write on them, save the trees, and hang them up on a sign. So what's the result? We lose food sources. The dead trees release carbon dioxide rather than protect us from it. Erosion. The life of all creatures in the world depend on trees. So every hectare of rainforest can store 200 tons of carbon. When you cut it down, the carbon goes, it's released, and it's a major reason for global warming. And many people say that you cannot fix global warming if you don't fix the fact that we're losing our forests. They go hand in hand. And this is the quote that I love: facts do not cease to exist because they are ignored. I used that a lot the past 4 years, by the way. So what's going to be our future? This with beautiful streams, sheltered farms and homes, forested slopes, or are we going to have slopes that are dry with runoff, sun-baked cities? The rivers will be silty, flood prone, we'll have soil blowing everywhere. That's what we have to decide. Somewhere out there, there is a tree tirelessly producing oxygen so you can breathe. And I think you owe it an apology. That's what House said. So we have to save them. And think twice, cut once. It's a good way to think of it. Trees don't heal. So when we used to carve into healthy trees, they can't mend. All they can do is try and ward off the damage so that it doesn't spread. This is their only defense mechanism to try for long-term survival. So instead, what they've encouraged people now is to carve dead trees as stumps. That's beautiful, that's fine. Greenpeace says that 90% of timber produced in the Amazon is illegal. World Bank says global trade in illegal timber is around 15 billion a year, and we are the largest consumers in the US. We spend 3.8 billion a year. For every mahogany tree cut down, a bulldozer has to smash through 60 other trees to get to it, and all for shine on your furniture. And there are solutions. We need nature-based solutions so we can sequester the carbon, avoid loss of forest, reforestation, soil health. It takes decades of work to change the direction of where we've gone. Trees don't just sprout up and everything is okay. It takes many years. The less we harness today, the less we fix, the less we'll be able to harness tomorrow. So some local efforts. This is Ohio. This is what they've done. Oregon is pretty big on reforestation. And one of the policies in Oregon, you have 300 trees, you harvest one and you replace them with 4. when we were in Costa Rica, that's the thing that amazes. Costa Rica is a tremendous plan of reforestation, that they're fairly successful at. Whoops. That's not what I wanted. So, all right, let's go down. All right, so now I have a personal relationship with trees. And there are many beautiful quotes about it. It says, in the forest, I find myself. In the house Dave and I lived in before moving here, there was a beautiful tree. I called it my tree. It was a very special tree. I used to go to the tree when I was upset. I would hug it, which is crazy. Very sadly, the tree was hit by the hurricane we had a few years ago, and the town tried to save it, but they couldn't. And so the tree came down. Trees are a place of comfort. We're almost done. This is, as you know, Muir Woods. Dave and I spent several weeks in California with my sister, who was dying. And when she died, we had the funeral. And the next morning, we said to my brother-in-law, we need to go into Muir Woods. They used to take us there because they always lived in San Francisco area. And that's what we did. I had asked Dave and my brother-in-law Bob standing in Muir Woods, because forests are a place that heals. The music of the forest silences all the noise in our mind. So, final words. For many people, including me, trees give a sense of proportion. They put day-to-day worries in perspective. They're good for our health and the health of the planet. And this is John Muir. Of all the paths you take in life, make sure a few of them are dirt. And this is a tree's final revenge, paper cut. Okay, and that's it. Thank you. Wow, I finished on time. That's great. Thank you very much. And I will now be happy, once I stop sharing, okay, to take some questions or comments or anything.
Well, I took a tour through Muir Woods, in fact, a couple of times. And one of the things that was pointed out to me is that they have a microclimate.
Yeah.
You can walk along and it'll be hot. You walk another 6 feet and it'll be foggy and damp and chilly. You walk another 6 feet and it'll be something else. So it's very interesting.
Yeah, it's an amazing place. We've been there several times. I don't know that we'll go back again. I think the memory now is very different for us.
Yeah, the other thing that was pointed out is where you have a tree, the tree may die, but it puts out roots which become other trees in a circle around where the original tree was.
That's what it should, right.
Yes.
Yes, young man, what would you like now? It's your turn. Whatever you're eating, I don't know, but that's okay.
Yeah. My book says that trees only supply the earth with 30 to 40% of its oxygen. So that means that they cannot produce half of our, that means that the Amazon rainforest cannot produce half of our oxygen because it's only.
It's Amazon that gives us half of our oxygen. It replaces the carbon dioxide that comes out, but all trees will produce oxygen. They don't need it. They need the carbon dioxide because they need to make the sugar.
Right?
Yes, but my book says that if the Amazon rainforest can't give us half of our oxygen because all the trees only supply us with 30 to 40% of its oxygen.
I'm not sure. I wish my grandson was here. He'd be having a great talk with you, but he's not with us right now. But trees, we need them. It's like when I did the talk on the bees. You know, people don't realize, look what's going on in South America. It breaks my heart. They're destroying the land and taking away the trees. And we have terrible, terrible climate change now. Okay, other comments, questions?
Judy?
Yes, dear.
So this is Dagmar. I have a question on the fungal subject that you had. So
Right.
at what point in time is the fungus detrimental to the tree? So you were basically alluding that the fungus has an interconnection with the tree root system, and it's really important. But at times, fungi will kill a tree. So if it's, I know from mushroom hunting that you go and look for king bolete under a birch, not under a spruce, for example. So there are definite fungus.
Yes.
And it's
You
not
are right. You are absolutely right. But in general, the most common type of mycorrhizal fungi are good for the trees, and they have this symbiotic relationship. But of course, there are things that can harm trees too, and that could very well be other types of the fungi. But it's interesting to me how you always see mushrooms kind of growing in these moist areas and around trees.
Mhm.
And, you know, you got to know what mushrooms you're looking at before you pick them.
Mhm.
Who else?
I have a question.
Yeah.
I've read if mature trees that are going to be dying are harvested, that then the carbon dioxide that would have been given off in the rotting process reduces the absorption of carbon dioxide, so that if you have a well-managed forest, it actually has a net positive effect greater than a natural unmanaged forest.
Right. I mean, we're going to have to take trees. Our lives depend on having trees. So it's just the idea of how do we do it and not destroy the forest. You're right. You take one down for every 30 or whatever, and then you immediately put saplings in the ground that can grow up and replace it. It's a balance act. And someday maybe we'll find out that we don't have to do that anymore. But
Oh, I have one for you here. Now,
Yeah.
in New England, where I lived in Western Massachusetts and then in New Hampshire and Vermont,
right.
at one time, there were dairy farms throughout New England, and they'd completely cut down the forests
That's right.
everywhere except in the high mountains. And even then, sometimes they'd taken down the forest. But in the by the time, you know, they did it in the early 1900s and during the 1800s. And by the time I was living there, it was all forest. And
Yeah. They let it regrow.
Yeah,
yeah,
well, they planted some too.
They did. We actually lived near a dairy farm in Connecticut, which is interesting, but it was small. And I understand that there used to be a lot more, and slowly closing and replanting. That's what amazed us about Costa Rica. Yes, there are some areas in Costa Rica where you have pineapple growing for miles around, and that destroys the trees in the area. But they are now really restricting that and trying to get back the land and bring back the trees.
it was just when I looked at that map that you showed.
That was showing up.
Yeah, so much of Oregon is forest, and
Yep.
so much of New England is forest, but I didn't see that on that map. You know, it didn't.
Because
Well, you see little dots, but what they're trying, I think what they're showing is a contrast from one to the other rather than numbers.
What was virgin?
Well,
forest,
more
correct?
than that,
Virgin forest?
virgin forest. I mean, there's very little old growth forest around here. I live in Western Massachusetts, and there are a few sites of old growth forest, but most of what you're seeing is reforestation.
Right, which is
So that's
never a
Okay,
great,
so that was old growth. Is that what that
I think so. Yeah, I think you're right.
got
I
it?
think
That makes sense.
Yeah,
I had a question, Judy. So
Yeah.
first, it was a wonderful talk.
thank you.
This is always sort of amazed me. If I try to get water out by suction, I'm limited to about 30 feet. In fact, the deep well I have here has a submerged pump to get water up to the surface. I couldn't do it with just a suction type device. How do the trees get water hundreds of feet in the air?
Yes, they do. It's
How do they
amazing.
They suck it up.
They suck it up through evaporation. You know, you got to work on your lungs.
But no matter
Yeah.
what I do on my lungs, I'm limited to about 30 feet.
Yeah,
That's
yeah, that's a fascinating problem.
And,
It is.
and
Yeah, I
in
think
fact,
it's capillary. It's a capillary action that tends to draw the water, so it uses the
Yeah,
interaction between hydrogen, between water molecules to draw it
Exactly.
up and then through evaporation.
So it must, maybe it's like a vein, Harold. Maybe it has valves in it that prevents the water from flowing back from.
yeah, or
That's
maybe it's
still
a capillary effect. Yeah.
Yeah, wouldn't cause a lift.
It is impressive. And
I-
it
I
was
think,
interesting that the height of the trees is determined by their ability to get water to the top, because I've always noted how trees seem to be very uniform in how they grow, especially on the top of a mountain. Occasionally, you get one that pops up above the others, but
Ben, can you take care of the newspapers? He's chewing up.
Yeah.
Well,
Well,
you have a tree line on a mountain.
yeah.
And no trees are above the tree line.
on the mountain too, if a tree that's well above the others gets typically exposed to far worse weather.
That's right. And that might have been what happened to some of the trees that you see lying over,
Right.
but
but
still
you would-
alive.
Right, but you would think with all of them growing at the same time and all of them continuing to grow, they would protect each other, but there does seem to be a limit as to how tall they will grow above the top of the mountain. And when you look at it, it's pretty uniform across the top of say,
Hey, Harold, might be a good talk for you to do.
A
I have
true,
to think about it, yeah. Well, I guess, on a mountain, eventually you don't have enough water and you have other weather effects. It gets significantly colder, it gets significantly windier. And,
Exactly. And your atmosphere is
Um,
thinner.
A true old growth forest will have a lot of different heights. When you see forests nowadays across the US, the reason the trees are all uniform height is because they were all planted at the same time.
There's actually, by the way, so interesting, in a little bit in the past, well, some number of years in the past, when I was looking at some of the dynamics of ecosystems, I spent some time out at University of Montana in Missoula, where they have a sort of active forestry stuff. And Kevin McKelvey had done this interesting picture saying, if you do random harvesting, so you preserve some old growth trees, some older trees, you don't just clear cut in sections, you actually
Want me to go upstairs?
recover more value from the forest because of the huge value of the old growth of the tall trees compared to the others. And you also preserve the land better. So that, there's an active effort he led.
Right. I cannot tell you how many organizations, as I was researching this, exist just to save the trees. Oh my goodness, what is that?
Yeah.
Oh,
We tell them to unmute.
Who is that?
I don't know, but Roger,
Roger,
you have to turn your mic on. You are silent.
Who? Oh, this is over here, Roger?
No, we got happy trees in Oregon.
Yeah.
Oh, happy
What is
trees.
that? Oh, okay.
Oregon is definitely trying to come up with ways to reforest. And that's,
Explain that's deciduous.
but I hope that you take away from this the understanding that this is a serious thing. We have these trees, they're not sentient. They're not, they're not sensing things like we do, but they exist and they have a reason to exist and they are important for our planet. And we didn't know that. I've seen pictures of when they used to take down the redwoods, many years ago.
Yep.
And it was, they would stand on top of them and they were smiling. Now, at least, you're not allowed to take down the redwoods. If a redwood tree comes down and dies, then they'll let some of the local shop people take it and make their little souvenirs, which we have several of. But you can't take a live tree anymore. But that's.
Yeah, fortunately for the redwoods, from what I've heard, is that most of it is dead punky wood. So
Yeah,
it's only the outside that's alive. So harvesting a huge tree, it would fall and break into small pieces because of its mass and its inability to withstand the fall. So, fortunately for them, they had a built-in mechanism to escape harvesting. Otherwise, back in the 50s, they probably would have harvested it all. So.
Absolutely. We would have had none, which has been terrible.
Hey, Judy.
Yes, dear. Yes.
They're a great talk. And have you seen the study? I believe it's from Harvard. And they found that if humans live amongst greenery and trees, they live longer. So there's a significant, I think it was 7 or 8% life expectancy increase if we live in a green tree environment.
Exactly. And that's why I showed you that it helps you, it brings peace to you.
Yeah, except when the forest fire starts.
Oh,
And one of the problems in California, and probably some in Oregon and Washington, is that people started moving more and more into the forests, which cut down some of the trees, but the rest was standing. And then when the fires came, they lost their homes. So
but
downside.
According to our president, the only reason that happens is the trees explode. I'm not going to get into politics, but that is something he said that blew my mind.
Well,
I'd like to ask about communication.
Yeah.
That to me was one of the most fascinating parts of your wonderful talk about how trees communicate with underground networks.
That's right.
What kind of observations did people make to learn that was true?
It's an interesting, there were some people, including the gentleman that I showed you, who started to suspect that there was something going on because he started to notice that when trees came down, other trees started to grow through it or above it or around it. And he said, something else is going on here.
So I can tell you, I can answer that question.
Okay.
Mycorrhizal fungi was not even discovered until the late 70s. And the way they discovered it was kind of in Oregon in the West, where they would do slash and burn. They would clear cut and then they would burn the soil, and that would destroy the mycorrhizal fungi. And then they would have no luck getting the young trees that they planted to grow well. So they finally figured out, well, what's going on here, So they just, that's when they made the big discovery of the mycorrhizal fungi and how important it is. And then since that time, they've discovered all these other important symbiotic relationship it has with the sugars and feeding each other and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, it was a fairly recent discovery.
It was, because like I said, 4 or 5 years ago, when I did the first time I did this talk, it was new to me.
Yeah.
And I had to find out, I was blown away, and that's why I had to know more.
I studied natural resources in college at University of Connecticut. And when I graduated in 78, there was still no, I mean, when I learned about mycorrhizal fungi in the 80s, I was also blown away. It's just an amazing discovery.
Just so that trees talk to each other, depending on how you define talk, of course. But they communicate. The mothers feed the baby trees. They've proven that now. And that's amazing.
Isn't it amazing how science, you think we know everything? Things like plate tectonics were completely ignored.
I remember when that happened.
Yeah.
And I remember Scientific American when I was a little girl. My parents subscribed to it. And there was a whole page on something called a double helix. And I was so fascinated. I read it and I asked my father about it, explained it. It was brand new. And I was a kid. So things are happening all the time. Look at what we're doing in space now, which is another area that I love to study and talk about. But there's a lot out there that we know nothing about. And I just hope we'll be around long enough to continue the search and discover things. And if we want to be, we can't destroy our planet. That's the bottom line.
I have a question for you, Judy, and for you, Cindy, as well. Christmas is coming. I have 4 grandkids, ages 9 to 12, and the whole notion of the communication aspect of the roots of trees is just fascinating. And given that it's something that's come on board in the last 5 years or so, I'm thinking, what children's books are out there that actually address that topic?
I'm sure there are, but I personally have no idea, but I've come across kids' books that talk about trees. So depending on how new they are.
Right, they'd have to be
Good
within the
question,
last 5
because
years.
we have a 10-year-old grandson who I would love to share this with.
Yeah.
So I will think about it.
Yeah.
Maybe we could give them the gift of a talk exclusively about the roots.
Oh, roots. There is so much more about trees. I mean, I talked about hardwood and softwood, but hardwood trees are not necessarily hardwood compared to the softwood. For example, balsa, which we make those little model airplanes out of, is from a hardwood tree, but it's a very soft wood. It breaks easily. So the lines, it's hard to cross the lines. That things merge and change. But
Well, what do you think, Judy? Maybe we'll wrap it up this week?
it's fine.
I
I
think
can go to sleep then, right?
they can go to sleep. She was telling me at the beginning that she was very tired tonight. This is her 3rd talk tonight.
This is my third
Yeah.
time today. Although
That was really great. And so next week is going to be exobiology, John.
Oh, boy.
John Miller, are you there?
We're looking forward to that.
Yeah.
Some of us aren't even sure there's one planet with intelligent life.
Some of us aren't sure whether or not John is actually exobiology. We're not sure, but I think
beat me up, Scotty. That no sign of life here. That was one of the
we have one John Miller here, but it's not the same John Miller.
Yeah.
Anyway,
different
I'll
one.
remind John that he's doing his talk next week, and it'll be great.
Very good.
We have a great lineup for the rest of the year. Judy, that was, as usual, you just get on a roll. It's kind of like, watching somebody ski that skis really well. You start out, you just see a couple of turns, and you just keep coming up with stuff. And it's all fascinating. So,
Well, a lot of this is stuff I've come up with long ago and that I just keep refining.
yeah.
Because they're important to me.
Yep, I can tell. Okay, well, thank you very much, everybody, and
Thank you.
hope you can make it again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye now.
Bye.
Good night.
Good night.
Night.
Night.